One button. No warning. Every hero on Earth erased. Not by a villain, not by a government vote, not by some extinction-level event nobody saw coming. By the man who built the list in the first place, Tony Stark. And here's what nobody wants to say out loud. He wasn't wrong to build it. That's the problem. Because a man who builds a weapon against his own allies and has a rational justification for doing it isn't a threat you can fight. He's a system, and you're already inside it. The world believed the Avengers were ungovernable. That was the selling point. No chain of command, no political allegiance, no single authority who could point them at a target or order them to stand down. Just individuals, extraordinary ones, who chose accountability because they decided to. Governments built policy around that belief. Intelligence agencies structured international cooperation on top of it. The public accepted collateral damage because the alternative was a world without them. Now stop. Ask who maintained the infrastructure that made all of that possible. The satellite uplinks, the identity files, the operational security architecture that kept every hero's real name, real location, and real vulnerability out of enemy hands. One person designed it. One person owned the servers. One person held the master credentials. Tony Stark. The Avengers weren't ungovernable. They were privately governed. There's a difference. And every institution that believed otherwise built its security model on a foundation it never bothered to audit. That should bother you. Here is what structurally collapsed the moment that switch existed. Every treaty the United Nations negotiated with enhanced individuals had an invisible clause. Every government that extended operational latitude to the Avengers was implicitly deferring to one man's current judgment. Not the team's collective decision, his. A server room in upstate New York, one command prompt, every registered hero's identity, location, and contingency file, accessible and deletable by a single private citizen. That's not governance, that's tenancy. The standard defense is predictable. Tony never used it that way. He had the capability and exercised restraint. Isn't that the definition of responsible power? No. Stop. Responsible power is accountable to something outside itself. It has audit mechanisms. It survives the removal of the individual who holds it. What Tony built survived only while Tony remained stable, living, and aligned with the interests of the people inside his system. A Tony Stark in grief makes different calculations. A Tony Stark who is wrong about a threat still controls the termination protocol. A Tony Stark who dies on a Tuesday afternoon leaves that architecture to whoever inherits his estate. The restraint was personal. The power was structural. That gap is not a minor design flaw. That gap is the entire problem. To understand why the switch existed, you have to understand what Tony Stark actually feared. Not threats. Threats he could handle. He feared authorship loss. Look at the pattern. Every catastrophic failure in Tony's timeline followed the same sequence. Something left his control, and the world paid for it. The Mandarin, Ultron, the fracture of civil war. Every time, Tony's internal narrative was identical. The system broke because someone else was driving. The weapon left the workshop. The variable escaped the model. So he built the switch, not as a weapon, as a guarantee, as the one mechanism that ensured that no matter how far the variable spread, no matter how many people he couldn't control, he could always rewrite the final equation. This is what intelligent fear looks like. It doesn't break down in public. It works late. It engineers contingencies. It builds quiet, elegant systems of control and files them under protection. And here is the line that splits this entire analysis in half. He was frequently right about the threats. Enhanced individuals had caused catastrophic harm. His risk assessments were often accurate. The people he designed the switch against had, in documented cases, done exactly what he feared. Being right about the danger does not authorize the architecture. That's the trap. Because a man who accurately identifies threats and appoints himself the sole authority over their elimination is not a safeguard. He's a single point of failure who convinced himself he was a system. He didn't build the Avengers, he built an extension of himself, one that happened to contain other people. Now reframe everything you just heard, because this analysis has been building towards something, and it changes the question entirely. We have been treating the kill switch as Tony Stark's decision. It wasn't only his. The switch required infrastructure. Infrastructure required that every hero, every agency, every government adjacent to the Avengers examine what Tony was building and decide, consciously or by omission, that asking questions was less important than using the system. Steve Rogers operated inside Tony's network. Nick Fury built SHIELD protocols that interfaced with Stark architecture. The Sokovia Accords legally recognized a power structure they never independently audited. Every person who benefited from Tony's system made a choice. Maybe not explicitly, maybe not in writing, but they made it. The kill switch didn't exist because Tony Stark was uniquely dangerous. It existed because the world kept handing him more room to build and nobody checked the blueprints. Look at it again. This is not a story about one man's control problem. This is a story about collective permission, quiet, comfortable, never officially granted, never officially revoked. The world didn't build a heroic institution. It outsourced one to a private contractor, handed him unlimited construction authority, and called the result a team. Tony Stark didn't take that power. The world offered it, and he had the capability to accept. Once the architecture is visible, it cannot be made invisible again. Every hero who operated inside Tony's framework now faces the question they had been successfully avoiding. Were they ever independent? Not philosophically, structurally. If your identity files, your mission coordinates, your cover integrity all lived inside someone else's privately owned system, and that system contained a command that could erase all of it, then your autonomy was always conditional. You weren't an independent operator, you were a credentialed user. That distinction destroys something that cannot be rebuilt through goodwill or team meetings. It destroys the moral separation between the Avengers and every power structure they positioned themselves against. The entire claim was voluntary accountability, the absence of a controlling hierarchy. Heroes who answered to principle rather than authority. The hierarchy existed. It just had a better public image than most. And this is where ideology becomes dangerous. The villains who spent years arguing that the Avengers were simply another power structure, another institutional hierarchy with better branding and more emotional appeal, were wrong about their methods, wrong about their conclusions, wrong about almost everything they did in service of that argument. But the architecture gave them the one thing a defeated ideology should never receive: evidence. The symbol fractures too. Iron Man was built on one idea: I have the power, I accept the responsibility, and I take the consequences. Accountability through capability. The myth required that the accountability be real, not conditional, not subject to override. A kill switch means the accountability always had an escape clause. The symbol didn't evolve. It was always incomplete. Here is the actual question. Was Tony Stark the structural failure? Was this a story about one man's trauma, his need for authorship, his inability to trust variables he didn't design, metastasizing into a system-level threat? Or was Tony Stark simply the most capable person in a world that consistently refused to build anything harder than what he was offering? Because the switch was never a late-stage symptom of corruption. It was a first-principle design choice, built into the foundation, present from the first server, present from the first identity file, present from the first moment a hero handed Tony their operational security because he offered it better than anyone else could. The world had options. Distributed infrastructure, shared credential architecture, systems without a single point of failure or a single point of override. Those systems would have been slower, more expensive, more politically complicated, more tolerant of inefficiency than a world in crisis was willing to be. So they accepted Tony's offer. And Tony, being Tony, built it the only way he knew how to build anything, with himself as the irreplaceable variable. The switch was always there. Was it his failure? Or was it the invoice for a comfort the world chose and never paid for? Don't answer that quickly. Power that one person can end was never shared. It was lent. Tony Stark built something that functioned. It saved lives at a scale no prior institution had managed. The outcomes were real. But a system is not what it produces when it works. A system is what it was always capable of doing. And who could do it? Alone, without oversight, without a vote. The final command doesn't tell you who Tony Stark became. It tells you what the system always was. They called it protection. It was permission.